Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jeevanam Kavibhireeditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadadatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Janaha. Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ma Kathitha, recorded by M. Sri Mahendranath Gupta, an apostle and a disciple of the Master. কলকাতায় শ্রী ঈশ্বরচন্দ্র বিদ্যাসাগরের সঙ্গে শ্রী রামকৃষ্ণের মিলন. Sri Ramakrishna's meeting with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar at Calcutta. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar is a very great scholar of the philosophy and Sanskrit, and his book Vyakarana Kaumudi is even now studied with great benefit by all the beginners of Sanskrit. And in Bengal, the popularization of Sanskrit took place only through that book. It's a beautifully compiled, simply written book. And he wrote books even for little children, just like Rabindranath. And his heart was so full of compassion for everybody. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says here, শুধু পণ্ডিত শুনতেই পণ্ডিত, কিন্তু তাদের কামিনী কাঞ্চনে আসক্তি শকুনির মতন পচা মোড়া খুঁজছে। আসক্তি অবিদ্যার সংসারে, দয়া ভক্তি বৈরাগ্য বিদ্যার ঐশ্বর্য. So in one sentence he summarized the whole thing. He talks about avidya maya and vidya maya. One may be a great scholar, great intellect, but as long as the mind is dwelling on kamini kanchana, on lust and greed, lower sensual pleasures, and greed for wealth and possessions, then even a great scholar is no different from the most ordinary person. He gives a very devastating example of a vulture which is soaring high in the sky, but constantly keeping its eye on the carrion and carcasses, and carcass which is completely rotten, pocha moda, a rotten corpse. And he says, but daya, compassion, bhakti, devotion, and vairagya, dispassion for the world, these are vidya aishwarya, these are the aishwarya glory of vidya maya. বিদ্যাসাগর চুপ করিয়া শুনিতেছেন, সকলে এক দৃষ্টে এই আনন্দময় পুরুষকে দর্শন ও কথামৃত পান করিতেছেন. Vidyasagar is quietly listening with great attention, keenly listening, and all the people around were looking at this Anandamaya Purusha, this joyful, God-ecstatic, divine personality, Sri Ramakrishna, and they are drinking deep of the nectar of the divine words, Kathamrita. বিদ্যার অবিদ্যা কথা কইতে কইতে ঠাকুর ব্রহ্মজ্ঞানের কথা কইতেছেন. বিদ্যাসাগর মহাপণ্ডিত ষড়দর্শন পাঠ করিয়া দেখিয়াছেন, বুঝি ঈশ্বরের বিষয়ে কিছুই জানা যায় না. Then discussing vidya and avidya, Sri Ramakrishna is discussing Brahmajnana, the knowledge of Brahman. And Vidyasagar was a great scholar, and after studying Shadadarshana, 6 systems of philosophy, he came to the conclusion that nothing can be understood of Ishvara, the Supreme Being. That means the Supreme Being cannot be realized by the intellect. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo na medhaya na bahuna shrutena. Kathoparishad says this is Atman, the Supreme Being, Supreme, the ultimate reality, pravachanena labhyo, not by too much of discourse, na medhaya, through the intellect, na bahuna shrutena, constantly studying the various scriptures and cultivating scholarship. Yamevaish brunate tena labhyastasyaisha atma vivrunate tanum swam. Yamevaish brunate tena labhyaha. Tena labhya, only by a person it can be known who is that person, who is chosen by the divine Lord. That's the bhakti language. Ramanujacharya will say, whomsoever God chooses, whomsoever God graces. And the Advaitins will interpret by saying, you are that divine self, that supreme God to which you are praying is your own self. So you should awaken your own higher self and long to understand this self. Bhagavan Bhashyakara Shankaracharya beautifully says, Tad prarthanaya eva, exactly telling which Ramakrishna says. By a longing prayer, you cannot live without realizing your higher self. How does it happen? You feel intensely dissatisfied with your present state of affairs. Swami Vivekananda defines religion beautifully by saying, religion begins with the intensest dissatisfaction of the present state of affairs. That now in the present state, eating and drinking and sense pleasures and socializing and society and nonsense is not worth throwing a life upon, Swamiji's statement. Continuously we are socializing, talking to people through various social media, eating and drinking and partying. The precious human life is too much to waste upon such occupations. Then, when you feel the intensest dissatisfaction with the present state, a longing comes to you, a question, query comes to you, and a deep sigh arises from the bottom of your heart. Ah, is this all? Is there something beyond us? If there is nothing beyond, it is not worth it. If there is something beyond all this, then it has to be realized. Swami Vivekananda once, only in a mood of divine inspiration, called upon everybody who was present there, the listeners. Where are the men who will stand out in the street yonder and say they possess nothing but God? The stunning silence, everybody was flabbergasted, frightened as it were. Then Swamiji broke the silence and said, then why should anybody fear? Then the two famous sentences he spoke, they should be put in letters of gold and remembered and meditated upon. If this is true, what else matters? If it is not true, what do our lives matter? If the ultimate reality, truth, Atman, Brahman, God, if these things are real and realizable, what else matters? What is the use of this life unless you realize the highest unchangeable substance? If everything is constantly changing, then you can't have a lasting eternal satisfaction and lasting joy. If it is true, what else matters? And if it is not true, what do our lives matter? Life is not worth living unless there is something beyond, which is unchangeable, which is true, which is eternal. Ajo nitya shashvadoyam purano. Aja, unborn, undecaying, shashvata, eternal, nitya, everlasting, purana, purapi nava. That is the interpretation by the Bhashyakara Shankaracharya. Purapi nava. Although it is eternally old, still it is ever new, constantly self-renewing. That is the only reality which is ever old and ever new, because it is timeless. It is beyond time. Anything which is within time will decay with time. The law of entropy in physics says that. In every closed system, you are moving towards the future. How do you know? When the entropy increases in the system, and you move towards decay and death. The Shadbhava Vikara. Jayate, asti, vardhate, viparinamate, apakshiyate, nashyati, mriyate. Jayate, it is born at a particular point of time. What is your date of birth? Everybody rejoices. Today is my birthday. You rejoice, you party. That was the time when this body was born, and you think that's very sacred. It is sacred when it comes to divine beings, incarnations, or men of God, because their advent on this earth purifies the whole world. Asti, it exists for some time. Vardhate, it increases. A child grows and grows. Then, after some time, when he becomes old, Iviparinamate, changes begin to occur. His teeth fall down and his hair turns grey. Apakshiyate, it begins to decay. Finally, mriyate, he dies. Nashyati, he gets destroyed. Starting from jayate to mriyate, shadbhava vikara, the changes which one passes through. And this Atman, which is identical with God, is never born and never dies, and therefore does not pass through the six modifications, jayate, asti, vardhate, viparinamate, apakshiyate, nashyati, or mriyate. न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचिन्नायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्यशाश्वतोऽयं पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे. From the Gita, which Bhagavan has taken from the Kathopanishad. It's some slight modification, the second line. So there is something which is eternal, unborn, undecaying, and deathless and beyond time, space, and causation. That is your real nature, that is mine real nature. And to seek that is the aim of human life. Repeatedly, this has been again and again pronounced and taught. Anything else is a sheer waste of time. Where are the people who will stand in the street yonder and say and proclaim that they possess nothing but God? Swami just swept over the audience with a glance, as if challenging people. Everybody was stunned into silence. He broke the silence and said, "But then why should anybody fear? If this is true, what else matters? If this is not true, what do our lives matter?" These are immortal lines. Assume that there is no God, there is no other Atman, and chasing the Atman is a wild goose chase. Waste of time, spirituality, meditation, God. Suppose you assume that, what are the consequences? Then you have to chase this world, worldly pleasures, drinking and eating and sense pleasures and socializing. That is what you are going to do. Is it worth it? The famous Jnani of the present age, Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, was asked once by some person, "Bhagavan, you are constantly talking about Atmavichara, self-inquiry. What if somebody does not know Atmavichara? What will happen to him?" Then Ramana Maharshi smiled and said, "Then he will do Lokavichara." He will be doing inquiry about this world, worldly possessions, what is the investment rate and how much of interest I am going to get in my investments, and worrying about how much salary hike he will get tomorrow. Lokavichara, and constantly discussing people. Paracharcha and Paraninda, discussing people, discussing the attitudes of people, and discussing events, and criticizing everybody. In English we say, great men discuss principles, mediocre men discuss events, and small men discuss people. Let us not be small men, constantly discussing what did X, Y, Z do, what did that person do yesterday, that person said this fellow went there, this. What is the point in discussing people and discussing things which are ephemeral? That's why Sri Ramakrishna said, don't discuss anything which is not godly, which is not spiritual. Anyavacho vimunchatha tamevaikam janatha atmanam anyavacho vimunchatha amritasyaisha setuhu Mundokopanishad. Tameva atmanam Veda, realize that self which is the Atman and give up all other useless talk. So much waste of energy. The prana shakti which is involved in Vak is terrible. We constantly keep on blabbering, talking, gossiping, and discussing most useless things of this world. Mostly kama kanchana, as Ramakrishna says, lust and greed. How much of wealth you have, how much of possessions you have, what is the property you purchase, and about enjoyment of senses. Anyavacho vimunchatha, give up all other idle, useless talk. This Atman, Brahman, God, Amritasya setuhu. This is the bridge to the immortality. Now we are in the mortal world. You build a bridge. Ramachandra built a bridge. Setu Bandhana. It's a famous story in the Ramayana. It is allegorical. The divine incarnation builds the bridge. So there are hundreds of thousands of people can walk over it and reach the other shore. The shore which leads to immortality. And the Jiva, in the form of Sita, is captivated there by the Rakshasa Ravana with 10 heads. What are the 10 heads of Ravana? Panchakarmendriya and Panchajnanendriya. 5 senses of perception, cognition, and 5 senses of knowledge and action. Vak, Pani, Pada, Payu, Upastha. Vak, speech. Pani, hands. Pada, feet. Payu, the anus. And Upastha, the generative organ. The 5 Karmendriyas, organs of action. And 5 Jnanendriyas, organs of perception. What are they? Chakshu, Karna, Nasika, Atpak, Jikhva. Chakshu, the eyes which see. The ears which hear, the nose which smells, the tongue which tastes, and the skin which touches. Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. 5 organs of perceptions and 5 organs of action. Dasha Indriya represents Ravana with the 10 heads. So we are captivated and enslaved by the 10 senses. That is Ravana keeping Sita, the Jivatma, as a slave in Sri Lanka, in Lanka. So the incarnation, the Supreme Being, he builds a bridge to rescue the Jiva. That is the Amritasya Setuhu. That is the bridge to immortality. So Sri Ramakrishna says, this cannot be realized through the intellect. Vidyasagar himself is a highly enlightened person, came to this conclusion. Vidyasagar Mahapandit is a great scholar, intellectual, not mere intellectual, a person of intuitive understanding, a person of daya, compassion, a person of vairagya, dispassion, a person of bhakti, devotion. Shadadarshana পাঠ করিয়া দেখিয়াছেন বুঝি ঈশ্বরের বিষয় কিছুই জানা যায় না. After studying the Shadarshanas, 6 systems of Indian philosophy, they are astika darshanas, theistic philosophies. What are they? They are classified into three groups: Nyaya Vaisheshika, Yoga Sankhya, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is called Vedanta. Purva Mimamsa is called Karma Kanda. Uttara Mimamsa, Vedanta is called Jnana Kanda, the Upanishad. After studying all this, Vidyasagar became convinced that nothing can really be said about the Supreme Being, and Ishvara Vishwe Kishvi Jana Jaina. No human mind can really understand anything about God because it is beyond the mind and beyond the intellect and beyond speech. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. Vacho nivartante, from there the words come back because words cannot reach there. Manasasa, along with the mind cannot reach there. Na tatra chakshur gacchati na vag gacchati no manaha. Kena Upanishad. The first one is Taittiriya Upanishad. The Upanishad says the eyes cannot reach there, vak cannot reach there, mind cannot reach there. Eye is Upalakshana, representative of the Pancha Jnanendriyas, Chakshu Karna Nasika Atvak Jikhva, and vak is Upalakshana, representative of the Pancha Karmendriya, vak, pani, pada, payupastha, and manas is considered the Ekadasha Indriya. All the Indriyas simply turn back, beat a retreat, unable to reach there, and the mind also doesn't reach. And therefore, no human mind can actually grasp anything about the mystery of God. Sri Ramakrishna. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, Brahma Vidya Avidyar Pare, Tini Maya Tito. Brahman is beyond Vidya and Avidya. It is Maya Atita. It is beyond the world of relativity. Maya is the world of relativity. Brahman is absolute. It is beyond Maya, Maya Atita. There is one difference between the Jiva in bondage like us and Ishvara. Ishvara is Maya Adhisha. He is the ruler of Maya, and Jiva is Maya Adhina. He is under the spell and the control of Maya. Jagate Vidya Avidya Maya Dui Ache. In the world of relativity, you have Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. He is explaining this. Jnana Bhakti Ache, Abar Kamini Kanchana Ache. Shoto Ache, Ashoto Ache. Jnana Bhakti, Vivek, Vairagya, these are all Vidya Maya Aishwarya. This is the glory of the Vidya Maya which releases you. And Kamini Kanchana, lust and greed, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. All these are Shadripu, 6 terrible enemies. These are Avidya Maya which lead to bondage. Shato Ache, Ashato Ache. That which is real and unreal, both exist in this world. That which is true and untrue. So this world, as it were, is a peculiar and curious mixture of existence and non-existence, Sat and Asat, as Swami Vivekananda explained to Maya in his famous Maya lectures in Jnana Yoga, delivered in New York, or is a peculiar combination of true and false. Satyanrite Mithuni Kritya, that is a statement by Shankaracharya in the Upodkhata Bhashya, the introductory commentary on the Brahma Sutra. Satya and Anrita Mithuni Kritya, by juxtaposing, mixing up in a peculiar way that which is true and false. How can true and false be mixed up? True is true and false is false. How can light and shadow come together? How can light and darkness coexist? They cannot. Logically, you know, light and darkness cannot coexist. But we behave in this world as if there's a mixture, peculiar mixture of Satya and Anrita. We naturally behave that way. This is called Adhyasa, this is called Maya, this is called Avidya. ভালো আছে আবার মন্দ আছে, কিন্তু ব্রহ্ম নির্লিপ্ত. There's good and bad, that which is true and false, Vidya and Avidya, but Brahman is nirlipta. Brahman is unattached. Nirlipta means it is completely beyond all this, beyond all relativity. It is the absolute and untouched by any of these pairs of opposites. Nirdvandva. Dvandvatita. Dvandva means pairs of opposites in the relative world. Relativity means two, opposite. Heat and cold, shitoshna, sukha and dukkha, joy and sorrow. These are all dvandva. Shitoshna sukha dukkhadaha. Agama payano nityas tas tatikshasva bharata. The Bhagavan says in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, everything is dvandva. Traigunya vishaya vedanas traigunyo bhavarjuna nirdvando nitya sattvasto niryoga kshematmavan. Bhagavad Gita. Even the Vedas are Trigunatmika. They talk about three gunas only, sattva, rajas, tamas, in the world of relativity. Traigunya vishaya veda, nistraigunya bhavarjuna, go beyond the three gunas. Nirdvando, go beyond the pairs of opposites. Nitya sattvastho, be established in the purest of the sattva. Niryoga kshema, without eye to acquiring what is not acquired and trying to preserve what has been acquired. Yoga and kshema. Atmavan, be self-possessed. It's a very significant word. You possess yourself first. As if you have lost yourself. You seem to have lost yourself. Carl Jung wrote a book, the famous psychologist. Modern man in search of a soul. What is the modern man searching for? He has lost himself. How do we lose ourselves? When we are children, we completely were self-possessed. Atma Rama. If you remove the ignorance of a child and replace it by knowledge, then a child is a great saint because it is completely self-possessed. It doesn't want anything from outside. It is fully satisfied with itself. Atmanyeva Atmana Tushta. It's called Atma Rama. He is completely satisfied in himself. Apanate apani theko man jeo namon karo ghore ja chabita bose pabi khojo nijo antapure apanate apani theko man. Ramakrishna used to be very fond of this song. Oh mind, just stay put in your own self. Don't move away to some other place. Whatever you are seeking, whatever you are searching for, you will find and realize within you. And dive deep into yourself, and great wealth is there within you. How many rubies and diamonds and costly jewels are there in the depths of your own being, in the ocean of your own heart. Doob de re man kali bole, hridi raat na kore, agad jole, doob de re man kali bole, रत्ना करे नहीं शून्य कखन दो चार डूबे फल ना मेले. তুমি দম সামর্থ্যে এক ডুবে যাও মিলবে রতন ফলে ফলে। রতন মাণিক্য কত পড়ে আছে সেই জলে। So much of wealth is there within you, just here in your own heart. Dive deep, dive deep. Sri Ramakrishna in the Gospel, how many hundreds of thousands of times he repeats this dictum: Doob thou, don't float on the surface. Dive deep into your own innermost self and find so much of joy, so much of wealth. Spiritual wealth is just for the asking. But we are running about here and there. We are depressed, we are unhappy, we want consolation from hundreds of thousands of places, from friends, from companions, from lovers and beloveds. Nothing ultimately happens, nothing works. Whole thing, dive deep, dive deep. Go, don't float on the surface. Kabir Das is a very beautiful small doha, two-lined couplet. It's called a doha. जिन ढूंढा तिन पाइया गहरा पानी पैठ मई बौरा डूबन डरा रहा किनारा बैठ. Whoever dived deep into his own consciousness, whoever searching and seeking within, he got all the inner rich spiritual wealth. But I, like a stupid person, like a mad person, was terribly afraid to dive deep, and therefore I was sitting at the bank of the ocean and cogitating, thinking, hesitating whether I should dive or not to dive, and I lost everything. You will not lose anything, that's the beauty. You think you lose, but you gain everything. He who loseth his life gains it, as Christ said in the Bible. You lose your little individuality and you are afraid of that. Remember, you are gaining the infinite individuality. The famous incident which happened in Paris when Swami Vivekananda was there. It's a great opera singer and actress, one of the greatest celebrities in France at that time, Emma Calvé. As most celebrities are, she was extremely depressed, unhappy, almost contemplating ending her life, sorrow-stricken, conflict-ridden, panic-stricken, didn't know what to do. Then somebody told her, the great yogi from India has come, is in Paris, you can meet him. Straight she came to meet Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji was in his study, quietly reading or writing something. As soon as this lady entered, Swamiji said, "My child, what a terrible atmosphere you brought with you. Calm down, sit down, relax. As if a storm is raging in your heart." Then she sat down. Swamiji straight looked into her eyes and started speaking about some of the innermost secrets of her life, which she had not shared with anybody, even the closest companions. Emma Calvé was confused, flabbergasted, terribly frightened. She cried out, "Oh, Swami, how could you know all this? Did anybody speak to you about me?" Swami Vivekananda smiled and said, "Is it necessary? I can just read through you as an open book." Then Swamiji gave her the Advaita capsule, the greatest medicine of Atmapriyana, the cure of all ills in the Dvaita Prapancha, in the relative world. He told her, "You are not a little individual encased in this body and mind. Don't secretly brood over your sorrow. Don't waste time brooding over your secret sorrow. Come out of it. You are that infinite self. It is not mere talk. The spiritual impulse, the Advaitic impulse, which this great yogi and Vedantin gave that to that lady, went deep into her consciousness and completely brought about a revolution in her mind. She was almost losing herself and cried out, Swami, what are you doing to me? I'm just lost. I'm losing my individuality. She was entering into a high state of samadhi. Then Swamiji always used to say to the Westerners, you Westerners are terribly afraid of losing your individuality, making fun of them, satire. You are not individuals yet. You shall be when you become universal. Then Swamiji told her a wonderful story. It's worth remembering, repeating to yourself, and constantly meditating upon. Swamiji said, a water drop was falling into the ocean, and the drop was crying profusely. And the ocean asked the drop, my child, why are you crying? Oh, I am going to lose my individuality as the drop because I am going to mix with the ocean. The ocean smiled and said, oh, my child, you are not losing your individuality as the drop. You are regaining your individuality as the ocean. That is your real individuality. You were me. You were the ocean. And the rays of the sun took you away, far away, and you were in the clouds and coming back to me in the form of rain, coming back to my own bosom to become one with the trillions and billions of water drops, your brothers and sisters like you, which form the ocean. So we are the ocean. That's our real individuality. And we are afraid to lose our little drophood. See, my little body, little mind. And on top of that, my little ego, my puny little ego, covered by all kinds of positions. I am so-and-so, I am a scholar, I am a learned person, I am an author of books. I have this very high position I hold. You know who I am? Atmapriyananda. You propagate yourself, you self-propaganda everywhere. My name, my form, my photo. What are you? A little drop in this individuality is infinite ocean of consciousness. You, in your real nature, is that consciousness with infinite. And Swami Vivekananda once spoke about this in the West, in America. And suddenly, in a heightened mood of the spiritual monism, Advaita, he proclaimed at the top of his voice, never forget the glory of human nature. Buddhas and Christs are but the waves of the infinite ocean which I am. And the audience was simply stunned. This is a paraphrase from Ashtavakra Samhita, which Swamiji resisted to read. But Ramakrishna put this idea of Advaita into him repeatedly. Mai anantamaham bodho aschariyam jiva vichaya udyanti gnanti khelanti pravishanti svabhavataha. Anantamaham bodho, in this infinite ocean of consciousness, which is me, Waves after waves are rising. What are those waves? So many worlds and so many jivas, so many living and non-living beings. The entire universe is rising in me and they get merged in me. I am that infinite ocean. Aham vrikshasya reriva kirti prishtham gireriva. Taittiriya Upanishad. He says, Iti Trishankur Vedan Vachanam. Trishankur, the great sage, says, I am the source of this entire universe. And my glory, my majesty, my form, the real, true spiritual form, is taller and more glorious than the highest mountain. Kirti Prishtham Gireriva. That is what I am. Assert that real nature. Talk about it. Think about it. Meditate upon it. Discuss it. Dream about it. Because that is your true, real nature. In the Bhakti language, you call it God. In Vedanta, you call it Chaitanya, Atman, Brahman. But your real nature is that infinite consciousness which you really are. You are encased in this little body, in the little mind. All these only dreams that you are dreaming unnecessarily. If you can't dream, then Swami Vivekananda gave a concession. Dream but truer dreams which are eternal love and service free. Clouds of happiness and misery pass over me. I am that infinite blue sky. Swami wrote in a letter. I am that blue infinite sky. So many clouds, and white and black clouds, happiness and misery, good and bad, they're all passing over me. They can't touch me. Assert this. Think about this. This Vedantic psychotherapy, self-psychoanalysis, this can give you tremendous strength. Atmana vindate viryam. Tremendous strength will come to you. Swami Vivekananda said, power will come, glory will come, all that is good and grand will come when the sleeping soul awakens to its self-consciousness. Awaken that. And that is, after all, your real nature. You don't borrow it from anybody. For that, you read the scripture. The Gospel of Ramakrishna is a continuous reminder, page after page, line after line. He reminds you of God, the infinite. And it says here, Brahma nirlipto, bhalamand jiver pokkhe, shadashad jiver pokkhe, tarote kichu hoina. Jiva, the ordinary jiva caught up in Maya and relativity, with respect to the jiva, the ordinary mortal like us, you have bhalamando, sadasat, good, bad, real, unreal. But the Brahman, the Atman which you are, is completely unattached. Brahman has to be realized as the Atman. The Atma Brahma Ikya, Shankaracharya says, is the purport of the whole of the Upanishads, Vedanta. যেমন প্রদীপের সম্মুখে কেউ বা ভাগবত পড়ছে আর কেউ বা জাল করছে, প্রদীপ নির্লিপ্ত. Just like somebody is reading Bhagavatam or holy scriptures under light, under pradeepa, in those days the oil lamps, and somebody is forging something for a fraud, but the pradeep is absolutely unattached. Suryo yatha sarva lokasya chakshuh nalipyate chakshushayir bhakya doshayih ekastada sarva bhutantaratma nalipyate logo dukkhena bhakyah. Kathopanishad. Just like the sun is not affected in any way, tarnished in any way, attached in any way, because the defect in your eye who sees the sun. Similarly, this Antaratman, the infinite self, is not in any way tarnished or disturbed by the functioning of the body and the mind. Shurjo শিষ্টের উপরে আলো দিচ্ছে, দুষ্টের উপরেও দিচ্ছে। The sun is falling upon the wicked people as well as the good people. The sun is completely unattached. যদি বলো দুঃখ, পাপ, অশান্তি এই সকল তবে কি? Then you may ask a valid question. You are talking high philosophy, sir, but I am feeling so much of sorrow every day. Terrible frustration, devastation in my life. Ashanti, lack of peace, peacelessness, pap, sin, dukkha, sorrow. All that is being experienced by a jiva every day. What is all this then? তার উচ্চার এই যে ওসব জীবের পক্ষে ব্রহ্ম নির্লিপ্ত। Once again the idea of relativity, which is the frame of reference from which you are talking about, is seeing this. Einstein talked about the frame of reference. When you talk from the jiva's frame of reference, from the frame of reference of an embodied being, a jiva like us, then of course all these things appear to be real. Dukkha, papa, ashanti, sorrow, then sin, then peacelessness, all this appear to be real from the frame of reference of a jiva. Jiver pokkhe, Brahman nirlipto. From the point of view of frame of reference of Brahman, is completely unattached. There is no papa, there is no punya, there is no sin, and there is no merit, and there is no sukha, there is no dukkha, there is no joy, there is no sorrow. You go beyond them both. Nirdvandva. সাপের ভিতরে বিষ আছে, অন্যকে কামড়ালে মরে যায়, সাপের কিন্তু কিছুই হয় না। The beautiful example he gives. Then how is it possible? Maya belongs to Brahman, but Brahman is completely unattached. Do you know how it is? An example he is giving to understand analogy. A snake has poison in its fangs in its mouth. If it bites somebody, that person dies. But the snake itself is not affected by its own poison. So if you make something your own nature, then it doesn't affect you anymore. This is the principle of vaccine. A virus affects you. How do you get rid of it? How do you get immunity? Create antibodies. So create a vaccine out of the virus, inject it in the body, and the virus no longer comes from outside. It's your own inside element, and therefore you will not be affected by anything which is your own. Fire burns everything that's put into it. Why does not fire burn itself? Fire cannot burn itself because the burning power belongs to fire. And the dharma of fire is the burning property, dahika shakti, and therefore anything which is its own dharma cannot affect that object. Brahma je ki mukhe bola jay na, because you're going to talk about it. To vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha, সব জিনিস উচ্ছিষ্ট হয়ে গেছে. Everything has been defiled by the tongue. In India, as you know, there's a concept. For foreigners, it is very new. Anything defined by the saliva, we are very particular about it. Suppose you eat something and then it has touched your tongue, then that can't be taken by anybody else. The uchishto in Bengal is called eto, echil in Tamil. So Brahman has become uchishta, defiled by the saliva, by the tongue, because Brahman has not been defiled because you can't talk about it. Everything else in the universe except Brahman have been defiled. What are they? Ved, Puran, Tantra, Shaddarshan, সব এটো হয়ে গেছে. What a wonderful analogy. All the Vedas, Puranas, Tantra, all the 6 darshanas, all of them have been recited, spoken. You do Veda Patha, Vedic recital. That means your tongue has repeated it. And therefore, all the scriptures in the world, including the Vedas, all of them only aparavidya. In the Mundakopanishad, Shaunaka is a great householder, Mahashala, approaches an illumined sage Angiras and asks a very pertinent question. Shaunako havai Mahashalo Angirasam Vidivadupasanna Papracha Kasminnu Bhagavo Vigyate Sarvamidam Vigyatam Bhavatiti. Sir, what is that by knowing which everything can be known? I want to know that one thing by knowing which everything becomes known to me. Then the sage replies, two kinds of knowledge are to be known. Dve vidye veditavye parachaiva paracha. The paravidya, the superior, supreme knowledge, and the aparavidya, the inferior knowledge. What is the inferior knowledge? Tatra apara Rigvedo, Yajurvedo, Samavedo, Atharvaveda, Shiksha, Kalpo, Vyakaranam, Niruktam, Chando, Jyotishamiti. Look at the so-called audacity of the Upanishads. All the Vedas, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda, and 6 Vedangas, Shiksha, Kalpa, Vyakarana, Nirukta, Chanda, Jyotish, all of them are only inferior knowledge, aparavidya. Athaparayaya tadaksharamadigamyate. That is superior knowledge, the paravidya, by which the infinite and the absolute is intuitively realized. Look at the boldness of the Upanishad this years. Swami Vivekananda therefore said beautifully, Vedas are the only scriptures in the world, spiritual scriptures, which say the study of the Vedas is only secondary, is unnecessary. Can any book say that? The book comes and says, please don't read me. You may read me, but it's only secondary. Vedas are the only scriptures which declare that the study of the Vedas is secondary, because it's aparavidya. So he says, Ved, Puran, Tantra, Shadarshan, Shop, Eto Hoye Gache. Vedas, Purana, Shadadarshana, 6 systems of philosophy, Tantra, all the sacred books of the world, of all religions, have become defiled by the tongue because they've been spoken. Mukhe poda hoyeche, mukhe uchcharan hoyeche, tai ito hoyeche. Because they have been spoken by the tongue, by the mouth, and they have been pronounced. In the Vedic mantras, you uchcharana, udatta, anudatta, swarita, dirgha swarita, and so on. Exactly, you pronounce these words. They have been spoken and pronounced by the tongue, by the mouth, and therefore they have been defiled by the saliva and uchishto hoye gache. Kintu ekti jinish keval uchishto hoy nai, she jinishti brahmo. But only one entity has not been defiled by the tongue because it cannot be spoken about. So, vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. Na tatra chakshur gacchati, navag gacchati no manaha. So, that Brahman which is not reachable by the mind or the speech, that has not been defiled by the tongue. Brahma je ki आज पर्यंत केहू मुखे बोलते पारे नाय. What is Brahman? What is an absolute? Till now, nobody has been able to speak about it, describe it. Vidyasagar was so happy because such a great scholar has never, such an original insight. Vidyasagar বন্ধুদের বাহ বাহ বাহ, এটা তো বেশ কথা, আজ একটা নতুন কথা শিখলাম. Remember, this unlettered Brahmin never studied anything, never went to school. Wisdom simply flowing out of his mouth because of the realization vision. Music flowed from their hearts, as Swamiji said about the Vedas. Simply flowing like anything, like torrentially like the Ganges. Vidyasagar acknowledges, oh, today I learned something very new. Such an extraordinary statement. I learned something which I never knew, never thought about. आज तो एक नूतन कथा शिखलाम. I learned something which is new. Sri Ramakrishna. এক বাপের দুটি ছেলে. Famous parables which you always talk about. And very simple, straight language. এক বাপের দুটি ছেলে. A father has two sons. ব্রহ্মবিদ্যা শিখবার জন্য ছেলে দুটিকে বাপ আচার্যের হাতে দিলেন. So he handed over both the children, the two boys, to an acharya, a qualified teacher, to learn Brahmavidya. কয়েক বছর বাদে পরে তারা গুরুগৃহ থেকে ফিরে এলো, এসে বাপকে প্রণাম করলে. So after a few years of study, Adhyayana, they came back home and bowed down respectfully before the father. বাপের ইচ্ছা দেখেন এদের ব্রহ্মজ্ঞান কি রূপ হয়েছে. The father was curious to know how much they have learned about Brahman and what is the extent of their Brahmavidya, knowledge of Brahman. বড় ছেলেকে জিজ্ঞাসা করলেন, বাপ তুমি তো এত সব পড়েছ, ব্রহ্ম কি রূপ বলে দেখি. My child, Bab, the father is calling the son Bab out of affection. Baba, we can say, my child. Tata means grandfather. But very often children also are called. In the Gita also is there. Nahi kalyana kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. Oh, my child, a person who does good to everybody, he never goes to ruin. So, my child, what is the nature of Brahman? Can you describe to me? What have you learned? What is from the Guru? বড় ছেলেটি বেদ থেকে নানা শ্লোক বলে বলে ব্রহ্মের স্বরূপ বুঝাতে লাগলো. The elder brother, he started quoting from the Vedas and the various scriptures about the nature of Brahman. Ashabdamasparushamarupamavyayam tatharasam nityamagandavachayat anadyanantam mahataparam dhruvam nichayatan mrityumukhat pramuchyate. It is unseen, unheard. It cannot be known by the mind. So many passages he went on quoting and trying to describe the nature of Brahman. বাপ চুপ করে রইলেন. The father quietly listened to it. যখন ছোট ছেলেকে জিজ্ঞাসা করলেন, he then called the younger boy and then asked him, can you describe to me what you have learned in the Guru Griha, at the house of the Guru, the teacher, about Brahman? সে হেট মুখে চুপ করে রইল, মুখে কোনো কথা নাই. Then the younger boy simply put his head down and was not uttering a single word. বাপ তখন প্রসন্ন হয়ে ছোট ছেলেকে বললেন, বাপু তুমি একটু বুঝেছ, ব্রহ্মে যে কি মুখে বলা যায় না. The father was so pleased. With great joy he said, oh my dear child, you alone have understood something of Brahman, because what Brahman is cannot be spoken of by the tongue or by the mouth. What Brahman is cannot be realized by the mind. And that infinite Brahman can be intuited within by the grace of God, by the grace of the Guru, and cannot be spoken about. Bodhe bodh hoy. Sri Ramakrishna used to use this phrase very often. You realize it in your innermost consciousness, as the consciousness of your own consciousness. Nityo nityanam chetanas chetananam. So it is the chetana of all your chetana, it is the consciousness of your consciousness, and the innermost self, which is called God, which is called Guru, which is called grace, which is your own self. And the realization of this self is the ultimate aim of human existence, which is possible by the grace of God, by the grace of the Guru, and by our earnest longing to realize it which is possible only when we no longer long for anything in this world. May Sri Ramakrishna, by his infinite grace, give us this passion, vairagya, give us this focus on God, the bhakti, and make us realize our infinite real nature in this very life. It is our very earnest submission and prayer to him. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukampathृतविग्रहं Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamah. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Om peace, peace, peace. May this entire exercise of my speaking and all of you listening, the reading and meditating on the Kathamrita, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, be offered as a humble offering to Sri Ramakrishna. Om peace, peace, peace.